When I retired from the El Paso Police Department 16 years ago, I was in pretty bad shape. When I began walking and cycling on the trail, all stress and pain was gone. When I'm on the trail, I feel at peace with myself. I can smile. My pain is left behind. I felt upbeat, happy, and I couldn't help but just break out smiling at people that I don't even know. This trail is more than just a concrete path. It's a place where you can meet people. This trail will connect all of us and make us all stronger. My name's Leticia Olivas, and I ride the Paso del Norte Trail.
El Paso is a really special place. We have over 300 days of sunshine, and so trails are such important amenities to our community. People can come to walk, to recreate, to be healthy, to socialize with friends and family. The trail is really important for a number of reasons, and health is one of them. And so trails and increasing the miles of trails in our community are so important, not just for our quality of life and to feature all that's really great about our community, but also for our personal health. The trail also connects residents to stores and shops and schools, so it can be used also for active transportation.
Before the trail, people used to have to walk in the streets. Some areas where there's not even sidewalks. The trail gives us a safe path to get to and from the places people need to get.
The Pasado Norte Trail is a plan for a 60-mile county line to county line trail across El Paso County from the New Mexico border all the way to the east side of El Paso County. When it's complete, cyclists could ride from end to end, from one end of El Paso County to the other, along the Rio Grande River, or to ride from Escalante Park to Riverside Park, where you can see burrowing owls and bat habitats. Conservation is also a really important component of the trail project, using portions of the trail to demonstrate how you can recapture water and planting trees and to create shade and cleaner air across our community.
The Pasado Norte Trail is the next step in the evolution of our great city that will bring connectivity to our entire community. It will foster economic growth and be a benefit and amenity to everyone that comes here, visits here, and lives here.
After riding alone on the trail, I started meeting like-minded people, and it pulled us together. We used to have the same issues and problems prior to this, but being on the trail helps us feel happy and uplifted and together. And now we've all bonded as friends, and we call ourselves a tribe. The tribe would not have been possible without the trail.
Several years ago, the El Paso community decided to invest in itself, and as a result, we have a new ballpark, we've got a children's museum under construction, we've got the Medical Center of the Americas, many other amenities for our community to enjoy and our visitors to enjoy. If we want to keep our best and brightest here, we've got to step up and create an environment where they want to live and raise their children.
We feel this is a really important investment to improve health and quality of life in our region.
When you're out on the trail with friends in the outdoors, enjoying life, feeling stress-free, getting healthy, eventually it connects us all to this. The Paso del Norte Trail will truly make us stronger.
Welcome back to the final panel of the day. Perfectly fitting that our 2020 Conservation Wrangler Paso del Norte Trail, their video really exemplifies new models in urban development. Models that benefit human health, as you heard, conservation, economic growth. And so today, that is where we will focus. Our third panel is on emerging models in conservation. Before we get started, I'll remind our virtual audience, if you're just joining us for the first time, you can engage via Slack, or you can send questions to info@texanbynature.org. We will follow similar format to the first two panels of the day, where each speaker will speak in succession, and then we will follow it with Q&A. So as I mentioned, we really can't discuss a future of conservation without talking about models that are changing the dialogue around the world. We all take pride in the fact that Texas is bountiful, that we have the 9th largest GDP in the world. We have 29 million citizens and we're growing rapidly. We have 11 diverse ecoregions. And innovating and adapting new models to care for these resources is critical to our future. So the focus of this panel is innovation. As I challenged at the first, I hope you'll think about what these speakers share in terms of examples that you can apply back to your own projects. What can you take home and do a little bit differently with the new thoughts that are coming out? We're no stranger to innovation in Texas. We're on display as a top state for entrepreneurship. Whether it's technology, food, biohealth, energy, we're on the cutting edge of industry across the board. We're also on the cutting edge of conservation just from the bountiful resources that we do enjoy. So again, as we hear from these leaders, I hope you'll think about how do you partner with them? How do you apply their learnings? How do you take your own project and innovate and adapt to the learnings that you have? Today, we are very fortunate to have a diverse set of perspectives on this final panel. We'll hear from Jennifer Chandler, who is the president at Bank of America Dallas. We'll hear from Jerae Carlson, VP of Sustainability, Communications and Public Affairs at Cemex. Dr. Jason Sawyer, Associate Professor from the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management, and Tom Constantino, the CFO at Iron Ox. Again, if you'd like to engage virtually, do so on our Slack channel or at info@texanbynature.org. And please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
Thank you very much. And before we get started, I'll echo the prior speaker's comments. And anybody from Houston that would like to shift their focus to the Dallas Cowboys, we welcome you. They're looking strong. I'm knocking on wood. It's early in this season. But as she mentioned, I am Jennifer Chandler, the president for Bank of America for Dallas. And in that role, I focus on 3 key areas. That's our clients, of course, our colleagues, and our communities. So today's conversation really overlays all 3 of those areas. I also share that because I am by no means the expert when it comes to some of these topics. We have a robust team at Bank of America that focuses on ESG, and our CEO, Brian Moynihan, as you know, is also an expert. So when we get to the Q&A, please keep that in mind. But again, we focus on those 3 areas, and as we start the conversation today, I'm going to go back to some of the basics, because I think that's where the strength of what we're doing has all started from. That is ESG. And this group knows it clearly. But I have to say it's something that has been near and dear to Bank of America's core values for many, many years. I've been there for about 20, and it's been a focus as long as I can remember. And some firms are just coming up to speed. But it is truly the framework that we embed everything we do around. Our responsible growth strategy is focused on that and our commitment across the globe. It drives the decisions we make as a business. It informs where we go for our support for the foundation. And as we look at risk in our credit book, all of those things are based on ESG. It's the framework of all that we do. So again, fundamental, but it's important to understand that it's been a long time focus for us. We have also seen a number of firms essentially copying what we're doing. And folks ask me about that. We see that as a great thing. It is not only imitation as a form of flattery, but what we're looking at is raising the bar. You're going to see throughout today's conversation that we're doing things and we're challenging those around us to step up and do the same. So some of our essential environmental sustainability commitments are here. There are a lot of words on this slide because there are a lot of numbers I'm going to cover today. The first bullet talks about our strategy, and I just mentioned it with ESG. Our strategy at every level of the business is focused on ESG. It's our global business strategy. It's our focus on our employees. And we have over 213,000 colleagues across the globe. So if you think about that commitment, how we're driving behavior, we're operationalizing several improvements, it's a big impact. The second bullet talks a bit about the dollars. And again, I'm going to mention a few numbers here. The first one I'll mention is our $1 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion commitment. We have made that commitment and we're coming through. That's from now until 2030. You'll see a lot of detail within today's conversation. I'm happy to answer additional questions on where those dollars are going. But I can tell you firsthand, we're localizing a lot of those dollars. We're also measuring the work that we're doing. The other great thing is that we are completely in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You're going to see that throughout as well. And hopefully you've all seen Brian Moynihan out front and center over these last few days and for several years, and his alignment with several global leaders on that front. The third year is that we've made the third bullet is around our multi-year commitments. I point this one out in particular because what we're doing is we're measuring what we're doing and we're staying ahead of the curve. We're meeting our commitments well in advance of the goals we've set. We're also using our intellectual capital. It's not only the dollars that we're providing, but if you think about the intellectual capital we have and it's robust, we're putting it to work each and every day as well. In fact, we have more patents than NASA, and that's growing. And I'm proud to say many of those leaders are right here in North Texas. So we're putting that innovation to work. We have a forum where they can bring ideas to us each and every day, and we're putting many of them into action. So that's high level. I'll step back a bit and talk about our global commitment. We've recently received an award on that front for greenhouse gas management, but that's one of many awards, and I think you have all seen that. And I'll go back to my prior statement. Those awards are great recognition, but what we see is an opportunity for other corporations, other industries to see that and to follow in our footsteps. We've also been purchasing 100% renewable electricity. We've been integrating LEED into our facilities. We've got solar panels, and we're watching our water consumption and all of that as well. In fact, you're going to continue to see solar panels on top of our banking centers all across the country. We have also issued over $9.85 billion in 8 corporate green bonds, and you're going to continue to see that work. Another example, we were one of the first to step up with this type of program, and many are following suit. We have also been a top investor. If you look at in fact, the renewable wind and solar across the U.S., we have been part of 17% of that. So again, a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you today, but they're examples of how we're taking this responsibility and taking action, and again, measuring that work. The next slide may be hard for you to read, but I wanted to point this one out in particular because it goes back to the numbers. A moment ago, I mentioned $1 trillion, which is a huge commitment for us. I'd like to remind everybody that that is on top of a $200 billion commitment that we have already made and come through on, and we'll continue to invest those dollars. And again, all aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Goals. But I know we're all here today to talk about Texas. So I am born and raised here. I have 4 children, and I would like to leave this state better than I found it, so I appreciate this great work of Texan by nature. And I will tell you, Bank of America is clearly committed to Texas. This market in particular in North Texas has approximately 14,000 associates. It's the second biggest market for Bank of America. We have several technology folks here, and we're very committed to the state. So if you look at the state, we've already invested over $5.8 billion in financing for renewable energy. We've also made a commitment to renewable energy, and you may have seen that announced recently over the last year or so. So we've been working on that, and you'll continue to see that put into work. But to hyper-localize it, I just dropped off the phone with a colleague of mine working on our Plano facility. We not only have wind turbines there, but we also have solar panels going in at that location, so it's very exciting. And the way they've explained that to me is we will save so much energy that it equates to taking 801 cars off the road, so a big commitment. So operations and employees. I mentioned we have 213,000 employees in Bank of America, and we have a number of programs, too many to list today, to tell you about that support the efforts. In particular, electric vehicles, that's been something we've been supporting for quite some time. We also support the charging stations at their homes, solar, and a number of other efforts. But one thing in particular we're doing is behavioral change. We have challenges. In fact, I just left a call earlier today on gardening. It is part of our culture. And again, folks are instilling those values in their day-to-day experience with the bank and their home lives, but also bringing us new ideas. We also operationalize it. And the pandemic, as challenging as it was, expedited our movement to digital, as I'm sure it did for all of you. So we were already on that path, but it really expedited the work. And what our folks are finding as they come back to the office, and many more are, there are no printers. So think about an organization like ours. How much paper comes across the desk? What that meant was we expedited all those signatures everybody's used to doing. You can now do it on your iPhone. We're going to continue that work, and our folks have been overwhelmingly happy about that. It creates a better client experience. We like to say we're high tech, high touch, and that's working very well. But we'll continue that work, and it's each and every operational aspect of our business, and we'll continue to improve. It's also our water consumption as we look at our real estate. All of those decisions are made with the lens of sustainability in mind. So governance and policy, and I've heard this throughout the day, are so key in why I think what we're doing is working. It comes from the top down. This week you've seen Brian Moynihan all over the news. He is there personally because this is important. But what it also means is you have to have your policies in place that are very consistent with what you are trying to achieve. So we're very transparent and we're very thoughtful in all that we do. So if something is listed in our ESG framework and it conflicts with any other policy, objective, or goal, we will step back, take a look at that, and reevaluate. And we continue to improve. But it's very clear in our policies and our procedures and how we work together that those things are working. The next visual is one I know you are all very familiar with, and I just wanted to point it out because it does align the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We look at our sustainable finance through these goals and objectives and themes. So if you take a look at our numbers, and again, we're very transparent, and I'm happy to share them with you all, you're gonna see those trends, the renewable energy, the sustainable food, agriculture. This is a view that we show our teammates on a regular basis, and of course externally to our investors and shareholders. But it's important that we frame everything again around the global views. We know we can't do all of this alone, so we're very much coordinated with others across the globe. And I added this slide. I didn't think I could go through today without talking about COP26, but again, a perfect example if you look at this. And we know this is a big moment in time. Brian Moynihan has been front and center in preparing for this and active now to help prepare the guide that's going to help the other banks and us do a better job as we work to net zero. But again, another example, and if you look on the slide at the bottom, you'll see a number of other partnerships, and those are not slowing down. So lastly, on this slide, is our performance status summary. You can access this on our website, and it is very detailed. So some of you may have very detailed questions today about a commitment we have made. Each commitment is within that document, and you can see our progress towards those goals. I'm pleased to say in many cases we have come through and exceeded that goal well ahead of target, and others we have work to do. But the process of making that transparent is incredibly important. People say, inspect what you expect. Well, I recently heard a speaker talk about that, and they said, inspect what you respect. And I think that's very telling. If you look at this and other data, it's something we truly respect and value. And that's why we'll hold ourselves accountable to meeting our goals. So in conclusion, I would just say it's in every part of our company. It's who we are. We're so pleased to be here today. We get a lot of global recognition, which is great, but we all love this great state of Texas, so it's great to see the recognition here. I would also say the work is not done. So I've met a number of you today, but if there's other programs, grants, things that we can support, we would love to learn more and be able to support that right here locally. So appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Jerae Carlson with Cemex. For those of you not familiar with our company, we are a global building materials company. We produce cement, concrete, aggregates, and urbanization solutions. We have 41,000 employees globally, about 8,500 in the U.S., and 15% of those are here in Texas. Houston is our U.S. headquarters. Our purpose is to build a better future. And for us, that means a more sustainable future. We have cement is a key part of our value chain, but we're working across our entire value chain to reach net zero. Cement accounts for globally about 5 to 8% of emissions. Here in the U.S., it's closer to 1 to 2%, but we all know that this is a global issue. It's not localized. So we are looking at our operations globally, and including here, as to what we can do to help contribute to the reduction of CO2 emissions in our value chain. We have developed a Future in Action campaign, which is really focusing on the CO2 reduction aspects of our operations and also helping us to focus on developing more lower carbon solutions and products. Our ultimate goal is to deliver only net zero concrete by 2050, but our interim targets are in 2030. Those are to help us stay on track. We will be focusing on our cement operations and reducing our emissions over 1990 baselines by 40%. Now, this is the most aggressive target that's been set in our industry, and it, along with our other 2030 targets, have been validated by the Science Based Target Initiative as being aligned with the well below 2 degree scenario. They also align to the 1.5 degree scenario as well. We are going to aim for a 35% carbon emissions or embodied carbon in our concrete line by 2030 and to reach 55% in clean energy consumption. One thing that's key for us to highlight is that for our 2030 goals, we are leveraging proven, known technologies, as they exist today. We are allocating the CapEx needed to reduce our emissions across our value chain, but we aren't losing sight of the ultimate goal of net zero for 2050. So we are starting to explore and invest in the things that we're going to need to close that gap between 2030 and 2050. For 2050, we're going to have to rely on scaling technologies, new innovations. They may not exist yet, or they're just not commercially viable, or they're not scaled to the industrial sector yet. But we're focusing on that, and we're doing that with a lot of partners. Also, to close the gap for 2050, we cannot overlook the role that nature-based solutions can supply. And that is something that we will be working on, and they will be within our roadmap. But before we had any of these targets, we were already working in nature-based solutions. We have had more than 25 years focus of conservation. We have large landscape scale projects, which I'll tell you a little bit more about one of them in a few moments, but we also go down to the hyper-local level. Community engagement is key for us. We want to be a good neighbor in the communities where we operate, and we find that conservation projects are great educational outreach tools, and they're also good employee engagement tools. We have a variety of projects, but the Wildlife Habitat Council has certified 28 of our programs. That's globally. Within the U.S., we have 16 WHC certified programs. We have been producing a Cemex nature book. We did take a break for 2020, but it focuses on key aspects of biodiversity and conservation, nature-based solutions, and we're on our 28th edition right now. We're very proud of those books. And also, we're very pleased to be recognized by Texan by Nature for our conservation wrangler projects, as well as Texan by 20. Internationally, we work with BirdLife International as well. One thing that we have been doing for several years is that we did an assessment of all of our quarries around the U.S. and some of our larger operations, and we assessed them for where they were with respect to biodiversity quality. And for those that had high risk, we mandated that on a priority basis that we implement biodiversity action plans. And some of our WHC certified programs serve as that action plan here in the U.S. We are also re-upping that and reviewing it to see the progress that we've made. And similarly, we are working to assess water-stressed areas in our operations. So we've now prioritized the areas that need the most attention, and we are developing water action plans there as well. Our hallmark project is the El Carmen Land and Conservation Company. It is a transboundary nature reserve that borders the Big Bend National State Park, the Black Gap Wildlife Management Area, and other adjacent landowners in South Texas, and goes into northern Mexico. We manage the Mexico and U.S. sides by different companies, but there's a great deal of land under management there, and it is a crucial migratory pathway for various species. We've successfully reintroduced and restored various species, black bear, the American bison, And right now, we're focusing heavily on bird migration. When we started measuring in 2008, between 2008 and 2013, there were 152 species identified, and as of this year, we're up to 265. And we focused on things that help make their migration a success. This is a desert landscape, so we have created like desert oases and food plots for them. We call it, stop, rest, and refuel to help them, and there's also habitat for wintering birds. We've had great success here also with trying to replant native cottonwoods. We recently planted 200 poles, and I'm proud to say that 198 of them took root, and we'll soon be harvesting about 100 poles to share with state landowners and private landowners to help rebuild that population. So that's the large landscape scale project, but we also have very hyper-local ones. We bring school children to our sites, and we teach them not only about environmental education, but about our operations so that they can understand what we do to offset the impacts of our property and how you can sustainably produce materials and what our materials are used for. We integrate our learning programs with state curriculum in a lot of places to make sure that it is aligned. We even do that sometimes with educators so that the tours and information that we provide to them can qualify for their continuing professional requirements in their states. And it's a good learning environment, be hands-on. So between our hyper-local projects all the way up to the El Carmen Nature Reserve and the Texas and Mexico side, we have had students from elementary through PhD candidates. They truly are labs, in-person labs that they can go and measure and learn. For young children, we will do a pre-assessment of their learnings, and then after the program, we will assess them to see the changes in that. We've also started evolving this model to look for the ecosystem benefits, how to measure it, to have the greatest impact, not just for us, but for our communities. And we look for business cases that make sense for us to partner with other groups and develop projects. And one that's particularly interesting is one we have in Croatia, where a formerly used quarry was rehabilitated into an olive grove, and now they produce olive oil. And the land has been donated, and it's operated by organizations that consist primarily of former Cemex employees, but the money that is earned from their olive oil production goes back into educational programming. And then we've also just developed materials, learning materials for native landscaping guides, just to try to help spread the word about the importance of aligning what you're doing in nature with what is appropriate for that region where you are. And now, how does this all tie into emerging models in conservation? Some of our sustainable products include Virtua. It's a family of low-carbon concretes, and you can get it in incrementally lower amounts of embodied carbon. You start with a 30% reduction over the baseline, and then you can progress up to 70. We have seen a market, and we want to push and drive for a market for zero carbon concrete. So we can offer offsets to offset any remaining emissions in the concrete. We're very excited. This is recently launched in the U.S., primarily in California right now, but is moving across the U.S. And we've gotten a lot of attention from our customers, and we're working to reach out to state departments of transportation and architects and other specifiers to educate them on the benefits of it as well. And in terms of the offset projects that we use to offset the remaining emissions, a lot of them are conservation-based, which leads to our use of that right now. We are transitioning to zero emissions, so we are going to have to hit scope 3 as well. So in Colombia right now, they are offsetting a lot of their emissions, over 200,000 tons. And that's just an example of, we're a global company and we share best practices and learn from one another. Here in the U.S., we are using renewable diesel in some of our fleet vehicles. We're also using it in some heavy machinery within our quarries. We have recently in Houston introduced some compressed natural gas mixer trucks. So we are progressing, incrementally towards zero emissions. And one thing we're doing on certification projects as well is that, as I mentioned earlier, when we have assessed our lands for their biodiversity quality, we are now assessing our own footprint for potential opportunities for offset projects. And I'm going to point again to Columbia because they've got a potential for a great project where they can protect biodiversity at the same time and develop opportunities there for the local communities. And working with different companies and organizations and governments, there's opportunity there for a project that could potentially offset 2.7 million tons of CO2 equivalents over 30 years. We are assessing all of our properties. We currently have a property in Nicaragua where we have reforested it and we're protecting it. And we're assessing another location in Costa Rica. In the U.S., our properties tend not to be as large as you might need for that type of a project, but we're continuing to look for opportunities, and also there could be opportunities to share that with other neighboring landowners. So climate change is a big part of what we do. We are integrating change management into our communications. We want to make sure that it is supported, is very well supported from the executive level, but we need to push it down through all layers of our organization to the boots on the ground, the people who are making it happen, and really get their buy-in and their engagement. And we're finding that it's there. Whenever we reach out to them on water conservation projects or community engagement events and Earth Day, they really enjoy it, and it gives them great pride to work for us. And that's just a highlight of some of the things that we're doing, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here and share some of that with you.
Howdy. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to visit with y'all. I hope that y'all appreciate it after I'm done, but we'll find out a little bit about that. We're going to take a little bit of a departure, and so I want y'all to kind of go on a little bit of a journey with me. We're going to go up in the air and then back down to the ground and see what maybe emerges out of that. That's really kind of my plan. I'm not famous for being able to stick to a time, and so I'm going to do my best. The slides are going to look like a movie because I have 11,000 of them, so I'm going to go really fast. I'm just kidding. I'm going to start off with this one, though, because this is a really good one to start with because it confuses everybody from the start. What I want you to think about here, I don't want you to really worry too much about trying to read this causal loop diagram, but I want to put up for you that this is the way that we think about sustainability. And one of the things that's really important to us and myself personally in my work with the King Ranch Institute and our partner, the East Foundation, is how do we innovate to improve the sustainability of ranching? That's so that we can keep working lands working and realize all the co-benefits that were discussed by previous speakers. But I want you to kind of look at two key parts of this slide here. Kind of on the right-hand side, this is kind of an external pressure of world population. People need to eat food. That's a definite thing, right? So people need to eat food. That pressure exists and isn't going to go away. The other part of this that I want you to see, you see the three traditional pillars of sustainability in this graphic. They're kind of in a dark red color. Environmental health, social acceptance and responsibility, and economic viability, that all three of those flow through the same common channel down there in the bottom right, which is improved management of natural resources, right? That is the pathway that creates virtuous loops. The thing with virtuous cycles is that they can all become vicious cycles. Right, it's the same loop, just depends on which direction it's moving. And so the way we want to think about this is ranching as a renewable resource conversion activity. It converts renewable biomass into food products for people. Right? Fundamentally, that's what it does. Along the way, done properly, it delivers a tremendous suite of ecosystem services. And the long-term value of a ranch is contingent on the sustainability of that delivery, right? How effectively the ranch can continue to deliver that and to meet those multiple value creation opportunities that exist. One consequence, though, is that in that process of biomass conversion, methane gets emitted. That's a fundamental fact. In fact, that's the competitive advantage of ruminant animals, is they have the capacity to convert the most abundant biomolecule on the planet, cellulose, into food products that are desired by most of humanity. But the consequence of that is there's a hydrogen sink necessary, and methane is that hydrogen sink. And so we're going to go up in the air and think a little bit about what emissions look like from these systems. The left-hand graph on the screen there is EPA's greenhouse gas inventory, and I like to put that up there for context purposes. And there's a thin blue line down there. That's agricultural emissions, all agriculture, right, in the context of total US greenhouse gas emissions. And what I've done is extract the piece of that belongs to beef cattle in a life cycle analysis framework. That's the right-hand graph. And what you see in that graph is that kind of gray bar that's right there by 0. That's total methane emissions. That's direct methane emissions from the beef cattle value chain. The dotted blue line is sort of non-methane emissions, most of which aren't directly generated in beef production, but rather through upstream inputs into the production system. And so that's sort of the LCA accounting on a mass basis, right? So that's kilograms or megatons of those gases. As we move forward here, we need to also think about what we really want to achieve. Do we want a lower footprint? Do we want climate neutrality? Or do we want zero emissions? Because those are not equivalent goals. So I'm going to really be talking in the context of climate neutrality for the next couple of minutes. And I want to define that for us as no net change in temperature, right? Atmospheric warming. That's what we think of as climate neutrality, and that's typically the context that that conversation exists in today. Lower footprint, I put this graph on here for the footprint reason. You can see these are the top 10 beef producers in the world by country. And on the far left over there is the USA, the largest beef producer in the world, with the lowest carbon footprint per unit of beef produced. Now, what happens if we decide that we will reduce total beef production in the US as a means of reducing emissions from that activity? Somebody else will produce it. And who might that be? Maybe the number 2 producer of beef in the world. They'll increase their output to meet that global demand. Remember the first slide, right? And when that happens, that would be sort of the, in the greenhouse gas mitigation landscape, right? That's leakage. That means we compensate, right, for lower production in one area with increased production in another area. And the consequence of that is actually a greater emissions intensity for the product that you were trying to reduce emissions intensity for. So we want to avoid that. So here now is another display of that same graph that I showed a moment ago. And in this one, again, that blue line, that's your anchor point. That's still the non-methane emissions associated with the beef value chain. And now what I've done is I've shown methane, still the gray line, right, so we can remember which one it is. But now I've expressed it as global warming potential on a 100-year time horizon, and I'm confident most of the people in the room are familiar with these expressions. If I add those two together, I get the kind of pinkish line up there, right? That's the total GWP 100 emissions from beef. But I want to think about, right, this is part of the innovation. Does GWP 100 give us the best way to think about management towards neutrality? Probably not. And so these graphs here are from a paper. I stole them. I can't make very good graphs, so I stole these from a climate scientist, Michelle Kane, and her team in England. And what we see here is a demonstration. The light blue line, that's the GWP 100 projected temperature change. And you can see that it keeps going up and to the right. Actual temperature change projected is the dark dashed line. And the line that follows it most closely is the one associated with GWP star, an alternative metric for the evaluation of the warming impact of methane in the environment. So let's recharacterize beef production as we think about it in terms of climate neutrality rather than direct emissions reduction. So when we do that, again, the blue line is still an anchor point on this graph, right? That's the non-methane emissions. But what we've done now is shifted the gray line. It's no longer where it was. When we estimate the emissions effects from beef production from methane on temperature using GWP star, this is the graph we get. When we add the gray line and the blue line together, now we get the green line. And this is gonna be about a 20 to 50% reduction in the apparent total emissions profile. But we wanna be at 0, so how do we get there? Well, I've left the pink line on here. This is the GWP 100 emissions profile as an anchor point again. And the green line is the one I showed you a moment ago from GWP star. I counted emissions. And what if we could reduce methane production by relatively small amounts? If we could reduce methane production by 0.5% per year, then that would result in that kind of intermediary green line. If we could reduce it by 1.5% per year, that would actually result in apparent net zero climate neutrality, if you will, for the beef value chain by 2040. Is that achievable? Potentially, and we can spend some time talking about that after the fact. Is that the only mitigation pathway available to us? Because remember, methane emissions can't go to 0. If they go to 0, we can't produce ruminant animals. We can't enjoy the benefit of that biomass conversion that is a fundamental proposition in this food production system. But what if, remember we were up in the air, can we come down to the ground? Our land offset's a feasible alternative here. And so what I've shown here is what if, right, spread over the entire grazing lands of the United States, which is a large number. If you take a small number times a large number, you get a large number, right? And so what I've shown here is a couple of different sort of mitigation alternatives associated with land-based emissions, or sequestration rather. The kind of tan line that's intermediary there is 25 kilograms of carbon per acre averaged across the grazing lands of the US. The line that achieves neutrality independently of any other mitigation step is 55 kilograms per acre of carbon. Is that a lot? It's a lot in toto because of the multiple across all the acres. But typically when we think about carbon sequestration, we're thinking about tons of carbon per acre, right? 1,000 kilograms per acre. I'm talking here about 55. Is that a feasible number? And so this graph shows you a study by USDA across the western United States. And what we can see here is if I averaged all those dots together, averages are great at hiding variability. If I average all the dots together, the average across the western United States is 75 kilograms of carbon per acre, higher than that threshold that we wanted to say that we could achieve, 55. But the green lines, I'm not trying to hide it, right? Variability is a real factor here. And there's a lot of factors that drive that variability, and our ability to predict carbon uptake is rather limited because of all those factors. So, is it already occurring? It's a good question, right? These are natural processes that already occur. So if we include that average across the western United States, this is what the climate footprint, if you will, of the US beef industry looks like, that tan line, if we add that land-based offset to it. So the question really is that an internal removal to the system, or is it an external credit that should be transferred to a different industry? That certainly depends on which frame you're standing in and how we would transact that. Certainly there are many existing standards for carbon sequestration in the voluntary marketplace, and there are certainly some emerging players as well, some of whom also recognize non-carbon related ecosystem service benefits. And really this pathway and how it evolves is something that we're quite interested in, and a lot of our work is focused on right now. How do we characterize that variability? How do we help understand where these trade-offs exist as we develop either internal or external offsetting? How do we apply those to systems to help to ensure that ranching remains sustainable and that the landscapes of working lands continue to work for many benefits? So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Constantino. I'm the Cfo of Iron Ox. And before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge what a pleasure it is to speak in front of you, Mrs. Bush, and to be here. A story that I was thinking about as I was sitting here was my father. And the reason I want to bring that up is because my father made a big impact on me throughout my life. I grew up around technology, partly because of him. But he said to me when I was very young, he said one of the keys that guided him through his career was to learn how to speak. And my father grew up with a speech impediment. He actually stuttered. And he was very uncomfortable as a child being around other kids. He was teased because of it. And so my father went into sales. And he went into sales to overcome his speech impediment. And the entire time that I remember my father, I do not remember him once stuttering. He had a great sense of humor. He was a natural salesperson. My dad influenced a lot of people in a very positive way, but he passed away 10 years ago this month. And I think he'd be really happy to know that I'm speaking in front of you today. So thank you. It's truly an honor. Iron Ox is a technology company at its core that we think we're onto something pretty cool that has the ability to really change the world for the better. And Iron Ox was started by a couple of gentlemen that had deep expertise in robotics and farming. Brandon Alexander, our CEO, grew up on a farm outside of Houston. And he really didn't like the backbreaking work that went with farming. So much so that they struggled to find adequate resources to do farming. He later on got into robotics and discovered that there was really a strong connection between what robotics could provide for farmers and the data that it could gather to use to apply towards plant science and ultimately towards reinventing the way that we approach farming. And so that's what I'm excited to speak with you about today. Now this image, if you were paying attention earlier, you probably recognize it. If we would have planned it differently, we might have had the earlier conversation showing Big Bend up here right before mine. But this is Big Bend, and it's one of Texas' greatest natural resources, right? It's an 800,000 acre preserve, and it's beautiful. And Texans love the outdoors. They love nature. They love preserving it. And Texas, by the way, leads the nation in production of renewable energy. Unfortunately, Texas also leads the nation with weather disasters. So according to the Houston Chronicle, Texas leads the nation, and between 2010 and 2020, there were 67 significant weather disasters in the state of Texas. And so we think that's troubling, and we think it draws attention to the need for doing something about climate change. And so I mentioned Brandon being from Texas. He's familiar with ranching, and he's familiar with farming and the challenges of that. And he's also acutely familiar with the opportunity to affect climate change for the better, to improve the climate through farming. So we're investing in Texas. We broke ground earlier this year in Lockhart. This is a rendering of a facility that we're building. If you think about the size of a Walmart, if you've ever been in a Walmart, it takes a long time to walk from one side to the other. This is 5 Walmarts. And this is in Lockhart. And we are the largest economic development project Lockhart has ever seen in its history. And they're ecstatic to have us, and we're ecstatic to be there. In fact, we were shocked to find out that we're the largest development project they've ever seen because of the receptiveness of the community. We're providing 100 jobs plus in the community there. And we have access to great talent in Texas. We're near a major transportation corridor. And so we're going to be able to grow fresh, local, quality produce, and we'll be within a day's drive of anywhere really in Texas. And we're not going to be done with this, by the way. There'll be more to come for Texas beyond this. So where we are right now with this is shows you really sort of two sides of the indoor farm that we're building. The north side of it is getting completed now. We'll be harvesting from that later this year and selling our first produce from this facility. We'll be selling basil, leafy greens, and strawberries. And then we'll also be building out the southern phase early next year. But we're really, really excited about this. So when we think about why did we take this approach, what we're really after is how do we eliminate waste? And waste is anything that's required but doesn't make it to the plant itself. And so the plant, consumes a lot of water, but guess what? 70% of the fresh water in the world is required for agriculture today, of which 90% of it never makes it to the plant. So that's incredibly wasteful from a water consumption standpoint. And there just isn't enough water, as we know, to sustain the current practices. If you look at other traditional farming as well, there's a lot of fertilizer, which we know throws off a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And most of that fertilizer ends up in the groundwater instead of getting to the plant. And so our approach, which I'm going to talk more about, uses precision-based techniques from robotics, from plant science, to make sure that plant is getting precisely what it needs at the right time. And if you look at other indoor farms, there are others, no doubt, but many others require using fossil fuel for energy. And we're instead using the sun. So we're not a vertical farm, and I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes, but we're using natural sunlight. So this really reduces the need for energy in our process. If you think about it in terms of post-harvest, there's just a ton of waste that goes on even before it gets to the consumer. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, about a third of food waste occurs before it even gets in the shopping basket of a consumer. And 40% of all food is wasted, from field losses to the way it's handled and stored, to transportation on trucks. If you buy a head of lettuce, good chance it's been on a truck and stored in cold climate for a week, to getting into retail and potentially being lost due to rottage in the store. So there's a lot of waste overall, pre-harvest and post-harvest. Now, this was really stunning for me to find out. I didn't grow up sort of a conservationist, if you will. I grew up around technology, like I said. And I'm excited. This is going to sound like a lot of doomsday things, and unfortunately, there's some negative things here. But I'm excited about what technology can do to solve problems. Because technologists like to innovate, right? And I do think that's a big part of the solution of where we get from where we are today to where we go in the future. But this was truly stunning to me. So fairly well-known, factoid is that we produce about 50 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions today, annually, globally. And we all know that we need to do something about that before 2050, or our kids or other loved ones that we have may not have a future. That's the grim reality of it. What was truly stunning to me was to contemplate that 4.4 gigatons of that comes from agriculture using today's methods. So we literally cannot solve for global climate change without addressing how agriculture works today. It's so significant, in fact, that it's equivalent in size and scale to the greenhouse gas emissions that come from transportation. I don't know about you, but that was like a mind-blowing data point when I found that out. I never would have imagined that. But between the food waste, which, by the way, generates a ton of methane gas, to the greenhouse gas emissions that come from fertilizer, to carbon dioxide that comes from transportation or other aspects of using fossil fuels in energy, there's just a lot of waste associated with ag. If that weren't compelling enough, think about arable land. Now, across the globe, arable land has been increasing. However, the arable land per person is going down. Right? Population growth cannot keep up with the availability of land. That's the takeaway. The population growth is truly taken off, right? So it's about 7.8 billion today. It's going to be well over 10 billion by the year 2050. So these two metrics are completely opposed, and we have to do something about it. So the way that we've been thinking about this is, for energy, we all know about solar energy, we know about wind farms, and so renewable energy is well known. But imagine thinking about food differently, and imagine thinking about it as a category called renewable food. And so what if food became part of the solution, right? Everyone needs to eat, we heard that. There's no doubt that the demand is there. But what you choose to eat and what you demand of your retailer or business partner, or if you're an investor, the company you're invested in, as a shareholder, there's momentum. So, like, we want to do something today. It's about demanding these changes, right? We are part of the solution collectively as a voice. Is there a silver bullet? No. But to me, this was something that the more I thought about it, the more powerful it became, because it requires expecting changes from those that can affect change. And we think that we're onto something that can be part of the solution through using renewable energy, through using less water, growing our produce at scale with precision data and analytics, allowing us to reduce grow times with zero waste, and improving our yield predictions so that we can make sure that the right supply meets the right demand at the right point. And as we think about this new future for agriculture, we think about it in 3 stages. And the first stage is about zero waste. A bit of an example of that, you see in this image, our little friend Grover. He's a robotic system that is about 3x3 or so, and uses LiDAR and uses battery packs and chipset and all that, and it's basically lifting up these 1,000-pound modules, the hydroponic modules you see. This one has basil growing in it. So it's going to lift this up, and it's going to move it to where it needs to be in the greenhouse. So we've developed these digital maps. We developed this system for the robotics to know where to be. And it's going to take this module and have it either be inspected, right? So the root system, we have another system that can lift it up, the actual rafts inside the module, inspect the roots. We have cameras on arms that can then look at the plants and take a 3D image. So for every plant, we create a visual image, and we can study the quality and the yield and the grow time of each individual plant. And then, of course, we can also dose with the right precision around fertilizers so that we aren't wasting fertilizers the way that you might in traditional ground farming. And so this is an example of zero waste. And by doing this, we get to a 15x increase in the amount of production we can get per square foot of land or real estate. I think about the plants as renters, and each one of those little modules is a rental building, but that's because I'm the CFO, so I tend to think about financial terms that way. But that's what I keep telling our guys, we gotta get the rent lower. But it's using 90% less water, right? Just a tremendous improvement in water, and we're getting better and better at how we do this. And we reclaim the water, and we reuse it. And so it's about getting all these factors together. The data analytics, you see actually the arm here with the eyes taking a scanned image of the plants, putting it into an artificial intelligence engine, and then getting better and better and more sophisticated at solving this problem. So as a result, we get more accurate yield prediction, we get improved yield per plant, and faster growing cycles. But we're not satisfied yet. So we want to keep going. And the next stage is really about getting to carbon neutral, right? So again, getting this back to how do we create a new category and thinking about food as we would solar or wind energy, right? So how do we look at the best practices of actually taking carbon out of the process wherever we can, right? So a lot of it's getting to be more accurate with predictions, with data, but it's also about putting in the best practices available to get to carbon neutral through this. So the real opportunity is to get to carbon negative. And so how do we do this, right? How do we do this? Mother Nature is perhaps the best tool we have, right? Allowing Mother Nature to do its job, right? So how do we contribute to that? But we're also looking at things like, I was talking to Jason earlier, like, digesters, right? So can you put waste into a digester and generate energy from that? Again, it gets back to technology, innovating, and getting towards neutrality and then carbon negative. So one example of that is, if you just look at the land that's used for farming. And a lot of the habitable land today is used for agriculture purposes, while we have a ton of carbon in the atmosphere, right? But what if we could influence that, right? What if we could change the dynamics and have more trees available? So I love Jenny's presentation earlier. I want to talk to her later about, is there something we can do to collaborate on this? But a 2019 study in the Journal of Science found that the Earth could support more than 500 billion new trees on 2.2 billion acres today, and that would reduce carbon in the atmosphere by 25%. Well, what if we further reduced agriculture needs and we could take out and make available for forest purposes enough land to do that, right? Or go beyond that. I mean, that's an example, not that we have all the solutions today, but that's an example of a way to get to carbon negative. Let Mother Nature do what it's best at doing. So this has been a terrific, for me personally, a terrific journey, and I'm super passionate about what needs to happen, and I feel like, if you're like me, you've never been more an environmentalist or sustainability-focused professional than you are today. And I got into this job, frankly, because I'd been in tech, but I also felt like I wanted this step in my career to be all about doing something great that I could be proud of, that my kids could be proud of. And so we need people on this journey with us that feel the same way. And I don't know, maybe some of you feel like you're deep experts in this topic, but everyone in this room is, sustainability expert to some degree, and it's up to us to get the voice out, get the message across, to be an advocate for this. At Iron Ox, we need customers to want our product. We think the quality will stand for itself, but if you're a consumer, you'll find our product on the shelf throughout Texas very soon. We need investors. We actually just closed the Series C round led by Breakthrough Energy, with the largest climate change fund in the world. We need partners, we need thought leaders, we need innovators, and we need people just getting the right message out that it's time for change. And so before I wrap up, I have one more very quick story. One of my favorite things about Texas, I'm a lifelong musician, and I love Texas for its blues guitarists. And so I grew up as a huge fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so back in, I think it was 1986, the late, great Stevie Ray Vaughan had a rally call for Texas that said, "Don't mess with Texas," which was really about, a campaign for cleaning up Texas, because there's a lot of litter and cleanup needed. And it was a great call to action. Texas did a great job of rallying behind that. I come back and I say, now is the time to call to action again for Texas. If not now, when, right? If not who? If not us, then who, right? So I think, again, another time if Stevie was here, maybe we could use him, bring him up on stage. But it's a great call to action for you all to join us on this journey and make a difference in the world. Thank you.
Thank you to each of our panelists. So at this time, we are ready for questions. If you have a question live, please raise your hand and let us know. Otherwise, if you are virtual, you can send in via the Slack channel or email. So we'll start at the back.
Dr. Sawyer, My family ranches down in your country south of Falfurrias. I noticed that American beef production has a much smaller carbon footprint than many of the other cattle producing countries. What factors generate this lower footprint?
So that's a really good question, and there's a couple of key features to that. One of which is sort of the longer history, if you will, of segmented production in the U.S. And while that often is perceived as a negative, what that's allowed is optimization of throughput. And so in the U.S., we typically have shorter residence times, a smaller supporting population. In other words, we're more productive with the animals that we have and the land area that we have. And so it's really that primarily that results in that lower footprint in the U.S. value chain relative to other players. The ones that have the most intensive carbon emissions per unit of product produced are those that have relied very extensively on large-scale land conversion in order to increase their output. And so the U.S. has actually been really fortunate in that regard, in that we've actually, if anything, reduced the total land area allocated, and the conversion practices in the U.S. have largely been in the opposite direction. In other words, as many of the people in this room are familiar with, we've actually revegetated large areas, and I'm really talking into sort of productive and sustainable grasslands, and that is not accounted for in that graphic that I showed you, but certainly land use change is one of the drivers in some of those other regions.
Mr. Santino, I have a question about the 40% of food that's wasted between the field and the market. You know, that's terrifying. And that number's been around for a really long time, despite the fact that we've seen emerging technologies appear and then, I don't know, fizzle out. And what I'm talking about here is irradiated food as a way to reduce both the carbon footprint of transport and refrigeration, increase the shelf life, increase the safety for the consumer from any sort of foodborne illnesses. And that technology has been around for a long time, and it seemed really, really promising. I know there was a lot of sort of popular cry about radioactive food, but it seems like we're far enough away from the uninformed hysteria that I described that are you or others looking at this as a viable way to reduce that 40% waste? Because that single step there just seems like a huge part of the challenge you're facing.
Yeah, what we're looking at primarily is how do we use, again, kind of precision-based techniques to really minimize how much food needs to be in a supply chain, right? So if you've studied kind of supply chains, one of the biggest inefficiencies in supply chains is the impact of forecast inaccuracy, right? And one way to address forecast inaccuracy, and by the way, forecast inaccuracy is a big problem for any business. The quicker your product rots, right, the bigger the risk is around that. So in technology, semiconductors decrease in value very quickly. So you want to get them to the consumer as fast as you can, but you need to maintain a certain level of safety stock to be able to meet demand. So if we can get our product to be grown, harvested, and immediately delivered to match demand, rather than it needing to come from somewhere very far away, right? That takes out a lot of kind of slack in the system, in the supply chain in terms of safety stock. We can also pivot very quickly because of the modularity of the way that our greenhouses are set up, so that if, let's say HEB came to us and said, we'd like you to produce for us red peppers, and we don't know exactly what we're going to need yet, but we'd love for you to dedicate a certain percentage of your operation to that. And by the way, 3 months after that, it might be something we don't know yet. We could turn that on immediately because we've laid things out in a way and innovated in a way that allows us to be able to pivot to match demand. So that's how we're thinking about it, is how do we better match demand to the supply and vice versa? And then how do we also eliminate transportation time by having great quality produce grown locally? And I'd be happy to speak with you later more about technologies as well. I'd love that, actually. And my son would love to learn more about the lizards. So.
Hi there, my name is Virginia. I'm with Water is Alive. I'd like to propose an idea about the waste. I'm working with Diamond Onions of Dallas. We purchase about 4 million pounds of onions every day for the restaurant industry. And I am tasked with dealing with all the waste coming off of that. It's about 1 million gallons a week that we are producing into a liquid fertilizer by inoculating that with food-grade microorganisms and growing those microorganisms. And I propose that this is a way that we, as Texans, starting here in Dallas, with Diamond Onions, to tackle not only the 40% of pre-production waste, but eventually the rest of the waste, and cycle this back into the planet where it belongs. So thank you. I look forward to working with you, and I hope that anybody that is interested in this stream of waste and fermenting this stuff and getting it back to replenish our soil and clean up our watershed would be interested in talking with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Ryan from Desert Door. Jennifer, I have a question for you and kind of for you as well, Tom. So I was just curious of the $1 trillion that you guys have allocated to invest over the next 10 years or 20 years. I think one of the big challenges is, especially in this space, is looking at something that Tom's doing is very venture forward, right? And you guys just ran out, closed your Series C, and you probably sold all equity in order to raise that, yet a large portion of it probably could have been capitalized against a loan if a bank would see you as a different entity than they traditionally look at income statements and balance sheets, right? So that's generally a problem for like venture startup type funds, is banks don't quite know how to look at it in a way that projects forward future earnings and all that type of stuff. So I'm wondering, are you guys thinking about things differently in that regard, in a way that will allow some of these like kind of interesting and new technologies and ideas to actually have a shot at being brought to fruition without selling equity, you know, from top to bottom?
Yeah.
Great question, and thank you for that. And you can speak to your experience as well. And I would say absolutely, and I mentioned earlier at COP26, Brian's work to help with the guide and to guide other banks. It's a challenge we're all faced with. I would say as we look at lending in particular, risk as a whole, we are looking at it very holistically, in a positive way, also looking at greenhouse emissions and other things of that nature. So absolutely working to be creative. It's not an easy challenge, but it's one that we see and hear regularly, and I'd love to get your comments. And that's why it's also important to remember that the work we're doing is not only in the lending. We love that aspect. That's a great business approach for us, but some of it is simply in grants and foundation giving and other ways that we can help as well. So I would say for projects in particular where you're having those challenges, please work through the other doors at the bank where we might be able to support you. But specific to your question, absolutely on the table, and something many of us are working through and we know is an opportunity to do more. And while I'm speaking, I also want to extend my thanks to Mrs. Bush. It's such a pleasure to be here. And this is a great example of the type of dialogue you all lead that it results in great action, so thank you for having us. But I'd love to visit with you more.
Yeah, it's a great question. It sounds like you're preparing it for a CFO. Just saying. When you're the owner, you have to be CFO part-time too, right? So I get all that. We're absolutely thinking about it. Look, I mean, we're honored to have, frankly, the type of investors we have. But none of them want to be diluted, right? None of them want to see their share ownership reduced to such a small percentage that they really don't take advantage of the return, right? Ultimately, they have to produce a return. We see because we have such a capital-intensive business model, when we're building greenhouses, we're building robotics, that takes a fair amount of cash. The banks actually really view that as an attractive vehicle because it can be collateralized, right? So what we're building out now in Texas will absolutely be a collateralized asset that allows us to then scale by similar methods going ahead. Because of our early stage, most of the money we need now is to continue to put it back into the innovation engine. But certainly the hard assets we have are highly collateralizable. And then there's sort of a whole spectrum of different types of financing options beyond purely venture-backed. There are some lenders that really specialize in helping to obtain loans that are government-backed that are a really attractive cost of capital. And there are others, Bank of America, for example, Wells Fargo, all of them are accelerating their interest in supporting sustainability businesses. And so I think you're going to see that accelerate. We need more, frankly, government support to be able to enable that funding so that it accelerates, so that sometimes shorter term traditional financial objectives don't get in the way as much as maybe putting an emphasis on some of the things that Mr. Pinero shared earlier. I mean, that's a terrific catalyst for driving change, right, at a level and scale that we can't do individually if used the right way. So yeah, long-winded answer, but I think there's a ton of different ways to go about structuring the financing so that you don't end up ultimately diluting your shareholders and owners.
My question is for Jerae with Cemex. I'm from a rocky part of the state, El Paso, with mountains, and I was and desert mountains with nothing to cover up scars. So I was interested in your comments about innovative ways to use quarries or how they've been utilized instead of just leaving a deep hole. I think you mentioned olives, or I like your comments on that, since that's something we live with every day. What's the legacy of that, or what are the possibilities for that?
Thank you for the question. There are a variety of possibilities, and a lot of it depends on the local areas and the priorities and the needs. In some areas, quarries are turned into lakes, water retention ponds. In other areas, we've seen them in our company developed into recreational areas. They've been turned into golf courses or dirt bike tracks and revegetated. And so we are focusing on revegetating ours with native plants and developing it, but we also just try to look at the local context. If flood mitigation is an issue in some of our areas, then we'll focus on things that help mitigate that risk. If, similar to the El Paso track area, if there's a place that's lacking recreation, and it's a collaborative process, that's where the opportunity lies. In some states, there are reclamation obligations that are they're pretty basic, but we're trying to be more strategic about that and develop reclamation plans that have, greater ecosystem benefits. Again, similar to the olive grove, that's a unique project, but there are opportunities. And so I would encourage you to engage in a dialogue, and if you are working or living near such operations, to reach out and start a conversation.
Can you begin that, even though there may be 75 more years left?
In some areas you can reclaim as you go. In some, depending on the mine plan and the local conditions, it's more difficult to reclaim contemporaneously.
Dr. Sawyer, I did have an additional question for you. You touched very briefly at the end of your presentation on the carbon standards that are out there. And I know that that is of great interest to a lot of the folks in the room that are doing land conservation. Can you talk a little bit more about where the data is, what it takes for rangeland and prairies and whatnot to start to realize the potential carbon benefits that their land has? Could you just share the latest on that?
Well, I'll do my best, and one of the slides that I kind of fast forwarded through there at the end was, do we know what we don't know? And so thinking about the land-based sequestration standards that exist, most of those are built around certain methodologies. A few of the emergent ones are quantitatively based, and that's probably an appealing vehicle. In other words, if we can have a direct measurement, then we all have more confidence in that. One of the challenges associated with that, though, is the variability that I mentioned. And so, you know, in my example, I used 55 kilograms of carbon per acre, which is, in the grand scheme of things, a very small amount. You know, if an acre of soil down to 1 foot weighs about 1 million kilograms, right? So 55 out of 1 million is a really small speck. Even a ton out of 1 million is a small speck. And so as we think about our capacity to measure relative change, right? Can I measure 2,000 out of 1 million effectively? That is a pretty significant obstacle today. The methods that are available today that are considered gold standard are direct measurement, in other words, sampling. But because of that large variability, the sampling costs today may well exceed the capacity for uptake over a reasonable time horizon. In other words, I can't repay the sampling expense with the amount of credit generation over a, say, 5 to 10 year period. So we see that as a significant area of innovation opportunity. And so certainly numbers of people are working on that through improved technologies for either direct sampling, modeling, or realistically going forward, augmented modeling, where we are able to acquire, as was discussed earlier, if we can acquire sufficient data at scale for multiple sources, augment those with more rapid and cost-effective direct sampling, then we likely can start to scale and overcome some of the variability issues. So I don't know if I specifically answered your question, but I think that that's really the space where the obstacle exists currently, and some of the contingent risk associated with those contracts.
Thank you.
Hi, Ed Novi from the Alamo Group. I've heard so many outstanding thoughts from all of you. Our particular company, we're located in Seguin, Texas, and I hate to admit it and a little bit embarrassed, I'm a transplant from California. But at the same time, I know that there seems to be this bifurcation between those in the rural areas of Texas and those in the urban areas as far as their thoughts about conservation or sustainability. What are some of your suggestions on how we can bridge that gap?
Well, I'll jump in. I think part of it is a conversation. It's, you know, getting involved in your local communities and getting to understand what the priorities are, what the needs are, and then look for opportunities. There are often areas of common interest for, you know, industry with the communities that they're working in. I think we're a lot of times we're more aligned than people might think, and you just have to explore, you know, your risk, your impacts, opportunities, and see where you have commonalities and where you can kind of partner and engage to move the needle beneficially for both sides.
Could you expand a little bit on that? You guys have done a masterful job in New Braunfels with the garden you've built and the area outside of your facility in engaging with the local community. While New Braunfels is not truly rural, it is a smaller community. And if you could talk a little bit about that engagement, I think.
Yes, we've created a nature center and built a facility where meetings can be held and educational programs can be done, but there are pollinator gardens. Students come out there for tours. They tour our quarry operations. We alternate, I believe it's 3rd and 5th graders, and when you're in 3rd grade, you tour the quarry operation, the 5th grade cement plant, or vice versa. I don't recall off the top of my head, but a lot of that also involves the nature center that we have built out there. We're also very involved in water conservation in the area. We installed a water recycling facility at our quarry there that it recycles more than 10,000 gallons of water per minute. We separate, you know, aggregate fines, and we can sell the product. But it also is very respectful of the stress on the water in that area and has significantly reduced our consumption of water from the aquifer there, and is very dynamic conservation center. There is a vegetable garden that is elevated so that people with physical disabilities who may be in wheelchairs, they can come in and access it. We work through United Way. They've got a program, and they come and they bring their participants, and they harvest the vegetables and the fruit, and they can take some to consume themselves, but they can donate the rest to a food pantry. So we just look for opportunities where, you know, in some respects it may seem small, but those small impacts add up, and they're very important. And if we can do that collaboratively across communities, you know, across Texas, it can have real impact.
It's a very important question. We were just having a dialogue before we stepped in here around that very question. In fact, my coffee this morning was with Tom Luce, who many of you know, who's doing work with Texas 2036. So I would say from our perspective, we are looking to be part of the solution. We absolutely see where the growth is going, especially as you look at that Texas triangle. I do have peers all across the state that focus on the other markets. We collaborate together to look at statewide initiatives. We, of course, have banking centers. It's a very important question that I think is on everyone's mind that we're going to have to solve for. So from our perspective, we're continuing to look at programs across the state that will help with the growth across the state and ways to cover the gaps we may have in rural areas. We also saw very quickly during the pandemic particular gaps, whether it was Wi-Fi or different areas of need across those rural areas, and tried to work very quickly to address those. So from our seat, we also see it as a big challenge. Obviously, a lot of great growth in Texas, but we need to make sure that we're ready for that growth and it's impacting the state in the right way. So we'll stay part of the dialogue.
Did you want to say anything? If Jason doesn't say anything, I'm going to say something about East Foundation.
You should go first.
Okay. So we do see many of our conservation partners helping to bridge that rural-urban as well. In previous Conservation Wrangler, Texas Brigades does that by having a youth leadership program that are based all around the state of Texas. East Foundation has a Behind the Gates program where they take youth out and learn about ranching and more about rural heritage. And so there are programs throughout the conservation community that are available, and all of those programs are in need of support and in need of participation and partners to make sure that they're fully subscribed and utilized to the best manner possible.
I'm Richard Seeline with the Resilience Innovation Hub, which is a national network of nodes around the country. We're partnered with the Insurance Information Institute and the Reinsurance Association of America. What's not been discussed completely, it's been touched on, and Joni, I think you and I had a little chance to talk about this, but this is much more updated. In 2022, the reinsurance industry in the United States has to reinvest $1.6 trillion. We've already had $1.5 trillion of losses on the U.S. Gulf Coast and a similar amount in different parts of the country, from droughts, floods, fires, snow, ice. I think one of the opportunities here, and I'd like to get y'all's sense of a new model, and that is, and Bank of America has done some of this already, but I think there's another next kind of stage to take this, and that really is a stack of private philanthropic public partnerships called P4s, and it's similar to the model that we did in the Chesapeake Bay with a little company called Walmart, a little company called Prudential, another little entity called the Nature Conservancy, and by the three of them coming together, they therefore inspired the EPA in the state of Maryland to come and bring all the tools of the public sector. So I'd like to kind of get your thinking about how we can take what we've heard today and in Texas create this type of funding model that really unleashes what ends up being $1 trillion+ from the insurance industry, about $550 billion of federal funding, and the $12 trillion of generational wealth that's about ready to move.
Yeah. Jennifer, would you like to
I'm happy
start?
to take a stab. It's absolutely something we're very focused on, and I hate to go back to my conversation this morning with Tom Luce, but part of what they've looked at with Texas 2036 is obviously some of the impact we've seen. I would say globally as a firm, we've absolutely seen the expense. For example, the winter storm had a huge impact on us and our general operations. It really put us on the map for what can happen in those situations. So from that perspective, we've seen the impact, we know the opportunity. To your point, we absolutely see as an opportunity where it's going to have to be that private-public partnership, federal funds. And so I would say we have national conversations with our public affairs partners, but we're also looking state by state. As you know, it can be very unique in each state. So I raise that example of my morning meeting because that's an example of how we're taking some of that statewide knowledge and what's happening with the legislature and bringing that back to our national conversations. So I would not say we have the solution. We see the need, and it's growing. We have looked at the forecast. We know that this is not going away, so we've got to solve for it. But again, I would say we're looking for that collaborative solution, public-private partnership.
Thank you. One last question, 30 seconds on each. You guys are obviously at the forefront of your industries and your fields on the next steps in innovation. What models are you guys looking at right now? What are you keeping an eye on as far as what's next for you, what's next for the future? And I'll start with you, Tom.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, because it's on our radar, right? So we have to keep on our radar the best sustainability practices in sciences, plant science, artificial intelligence, so all those kind of foundational technologies that are critical for us. But we're also watching others that are in this space to see how they're approaching this. We think our solution combines all these different sciences uniquely and better, but we can't ever feel complacent with that. So and I think we're also just watching in general how I mentioned funding because I tend to think about funding quite a bit, but how the funding availability evolves. Again, I think really we're at an inflection point where that's going to improve, but it takes a while for these types of businesses to actually scale, and they're capital intensive. So that's another thing that we're watching carefully. And I think those are probably the key things. I think that maybe the third is really in your neck of the woods, Jerae. I mean, with Cemex, for example, we're very interested in sustainable construction, right? And so greenhouses are, they can be very cheap, they can be very expensive. And they can be also not necessarily the most friendly carbon methods. And so I'm interested particularly in how do we find the right intersection of carbon neutrality and cost efficiency for our industry.
Fantastic. Jason?
So, I guess that thinking for us, how we are thinking about what's next or what's immediate, and then maybe what's slightly beyond that. I've already mentioned the issues around measurement and metrics, and I think the ecometrics discussion earlier was a really great example that if we want to cause positive change through management or action, we have to have reasonable metrics, right, to manage toward. And one of the challenges that exists, and even in my talk, the difference between global warming potential on a 100-year time horizon versus GWP star versus one of the myriad other characterizations of emissions, that the targets move. And so in each of those may be appropriate in a certain setting, but maybe open up the discussion and have it be a bit less positional about what metrics are appropriate for what purposes, so that we can develop the appropriate technologies to hasten and reduce cost of measurement so that we can quantify progress. That would be a very generalized statement, I think, about what's next or what we are paying a lot of attention to in the broad space. More immediately, I think, would be back to the question about rural versus urban. And in the context of what are appropriate metrics might also be, how do we have better conversations about what's real? What really matters to people? How do people, say, that are charged with land stewardship effectively communicate about the good works that they do and have that be well received? How might they better understand what the demand space looks like and be able to more effectively deliver that? And one area for that would be the further development of these marketplaces for those types of things, and that does come through partnership and discussion. The very last kind of thought that's related to that is how will, if you think about sort of the evolution of measurement and assessment, does that also then create volatility in the valuation of any sort of tradable conservation asset? And so I tend to think about these things really from kind of a risk management profile, right? Like, if I'm going to enter into this or commit a large tract of land for a very long time, how might we actually evaluate and mitigate those sort of contingent risks that are associated with, I'm going to call it, it's not really price volatility, right? It's value volatility, because the value in many ways currently is perceptive and not concrete. So those are kind of the things that I guess we're thinking about the most and would like to make more progress in.
Thank you. Jerae?
I think it's very important for us to look at things from a life cycle perspective, and that's one thing that we're doing. As I mentioned, we're trying to get to zero carbon concrete, which is the end of our value chain, but that value, that product, is not the end product. It goes into the roads, the streets, the bridges, the homes, and when it's there, there's embodied emissions when it's in place, but the use phase of the built environment has much higher emissions. And so I think that we all have to take a step back and understand that no single person or sector or industry has the solution. We all need to work together. And so if we can take the bigger picture and try to take a more holistic view and understand, what are the things that you can do along your own value chain to help contribute to reductions, that's where we're going to really see dramatic shifts. We will see redesigns of projects. They will be designed to take advantage of the properties that the materials incorporated into it provide. For example, concrete acts as a carbon sink. A lot of people don't know that. We've known it for a long time. The IPCC has recently recognized it in their literature as well. We're looking for opportunities to divert waste from landfills so that we can recover energy to displace some of the fossil fuels that we use in our cement kilns. So that would contribute to a virtuous cycle, which is the term you used earlier. Concrete it's recyclable in and of itself. So that's our approach right now, is that we're looking all along the value chain and the stakeholders that plug into our value chain so that we can start working with them as well to move the needle collectively.
Thanks, Jerae. And Jennifer?
I'd say many of the same themes, but we are looking at speed, right, and scale. How can we work across the globe collectively to move the dial? Of course, getting capital into the right hands and working to expedite that, and we'll stay very focused on it. But I wouldn't underestimate AI. AI is a huge part of what we're doing every day. It's improving our efficiencies and across the board. I think your conversation was great, but we're going to see AI continue to move the dial collectively, but scale, again, and moving very quickly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And if you guys wanted to go ahead and take your seats, please. As the final panel is taking their seats, I just wanted to again thank each of our speakers today for taking the time out of their busy schedules to prepare, to really share their learnings, and to provide their expertise across many different areas today. We deeply appreciate you being here and the time it took to prepare to be here today. I also want to thank again our partners and members that made today possible: Lyda Hill Philanthropies, Marathon Petroleum, HEB, Enbridge, Phillips 66, NRG Reliant, EOG Resources, and DD Rose, and all of our silver and bronze partners as well. You see them on the panels outside the door, and you've seen them on the screens throughout today. We appreciate your commitment and are deeply, deeply appreciative for it. So at this point in the day, we've heard a lot about Texas and our leadership and just where we are as a state in economy and people and growth and natural resources. And it strikes me that we have all of these things, but we have more. We have history, we have expertise. We have innovation that we've heard about today that's happening all over the state. And we also have opportunity. I challenged you at the start of the day to take part in radically shaping the future, to taking advantage of the tailwinds of the past 18 months and really moving forward for progress. We heard from a variety of viewpoints, and we have a lot of lessons to take home, some notable, like lizards being a Trojan horse. Everything starting with liquor. We've had some gems today. But in all seriousness, we have heard a lot of fantastic ideas to take home and really employ in our own areas. And so for us, what is this future of conservation? What does it look like? How do we define it? How do we shape it? What role are we each going to play as we move forward? The future, it's innovation, just like we heard in this last panel, using tech and science differently to feed a growing population, like Iron Ox is looking at, and others, using materials in ways that are beneficial, like Audubon, Texas, developing and offering new products that achieve neutral impact, like Cemex. The examples are all around us, and we have the opportunity to build on what they're doing. The future is collaboration. We heard a lot about this throughout the day, but some of the sound bites that I really enjoyed were, just from Jerae. It's a life cycle. We're all in this together. It's more than just collaboration. It's looking at the entire life cycle and engaging at every single point in the value chain. It's bringing diverse organizations together, like Desert Door is doing with the landowners across the state of Texas, San Antonio Zoo with landowners and training new dog handlers, even if they don't have dogs. It's pretty amazing. It's following the example to work efficiently and build on each other's expertise and capacity. The future is metrics focused. There's a business case here. We heard a lot about that. Let nature do what nature is meant to do, and the value is there. We can, step away from some of the emotion of nature being warm and fuzzy. We heard that from Jenny. And we can really dive into the metrics that are in front of us. We're combining our business acumen and leadership like never before. Examples with the Texas Longleaf team and our Canadian partners showing the way with some of the programs they're implementing with Texas as well. The future will be new models and methodologies. We heard about really forward-leaning from Dr. Sawyer at the King Ranch Institute and financial incentives, especially in the Q&A period from Jennifer Chandler, on how they're looking at funding new opportunities, how to engage differently with banks, and what that looks like in the future. And most importantly, we're hearing about realizing the return on conservation, utilizing nature for what nature was meant to be. And it really is a true opportunity to do exactly what we set out at the start of the day, which is to make Texas the model of conservation for the world. Again, we heard the stats. We're the leader in renewable energy. We're the leaders in all energy. We're powering the world. And we have an opportunity to do that in a very different way moving forward. So the future is intentional. We heard go with intent. Participate. It's participatory. Be stewards. Be open in our communication and open in the capacity that we have to achieve it. Come to the table and bring what you have and develop relationships from there. We will select what our emphasis will be. Today is our slowest day. Really liked that one as well. So today we have that opportunity to understand that it's our slowest day. We're going to move faster and faster and faster towards progress. We have an opportunity to realize progress we haven't yet imagined. Again, I challenge you, don't make today just a listening session where you think, oh, that's a good idea, that was a fun project. That's cool, it's fun. Make today an inflection point. Go home and do something differently. Help us join in a movement. Make sure that every Texan in your organization, in your community, in your schools, everywhere where you have the opportunity to make an impact, start the movement. Make sure that every Texan is engaged in conservation impact as we move forward. Each of us shaping the future that we're defining collectively. This is the opportunity in front of us, and I'm excited to have you here. So thank you very much for being part of this conversation today. Thank you. So at this time, if we could stop the virtual portion of the day. Thank you for everyone who joined virtual. We are moving into something that we will only be doing live in advance of an announcement tomorrow, so please stop the virtual streaming. And for those who are still in the audience, we're going to take a few more minutes, and we have a very fitting end to the day. So we are actually going to recognize our 2021 Texan by Nature 20, which will be announced tomorrow morning. And this is a pre-announcement, so please don't tweet about it, don't put it on social media just yet, even if it's your favorite company in the world. But these are industry leaders who are truly leading the way in sustainability, and we couldn't be more thrilled to recognize them. And so to help me in recognizing them, I actually have the honor and the good fortune of introducing our board chairman, Cynthia Pickett Stevenson, to the stage. So Cynthia is our board chairman, and if you know her, you love her. She's a fourth-generation Houstonian, and she is a fervent supporter of health and conservation in Texas and across Houston in particular. But Cynthia embodies Texan pride, passion, and progress. She's a practicing attorney. She's been doing that for a number of years, even though she looks like she just started. And Cynthia understands and models the merge of industry and conservation perhaps better than anyone else. She's a force of nature. She's a friend to each of us. And she is the spirit and energy behind this year's board of directors. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia.
Does anyone have a renewable phone book for me to stand on? Because I don't think I quite can see you over this podium. Okay, all right. Thank you, Joni, and thanks to each of you for taking part in a day of learning and dialogue, and for the reassurance that our hopes for conservation, traveling hand in hand with industry, are not just a dream, they are going to be realized. So thank you. Thank you to our partners and our sponsors and members for making today possible. We're deeply grateful for each of you and to each of you. What an exciting time it is to be Texan by nature. You Californians got here as fast as you can. We welcome you to be Texan by nature. We hear that in your voice. In our journey with the Wranglers today, we have been seeing and witnessing rookery islands on our beloved Galveston Bay and Gulf Coast. We are seeing the saving of our iconic lizards, horned lizards that I used to chase after until I saw a rattlesnake that was longer than me, to restoring the piney woods of East Texas, to finding new and sustainable ways to feed our growing population, to recycle our water, to push the envelope in products and processes. The progress we're seeing in Texas is leading the world. I believe that we are divinely guided in this mission. I believe that nature is a healthcare delivery system. It is an energy delivery system. It is everything. It's at the essence of what our Creator put in our good hands to steward. And in this great state, we have come together in Texan by Nature and with each of you to create a model unlike anything else. And in a state where we're heavily criticized from time to time for the way in which we extract and utilize energy. Our cows who eat grass, I know seaweed may help some of the methane, but I don't want to overharvest the seabreads. We care about our resources, and we care about traveling between conservation and industry so that we all can leave this world a better place, but we can all create a model that will lead not only this country, but the world. I'm inspired by what we've discussed and learned. As I've listened and looked, I've seen what was on the screen here, which are bricks in a wall, which each of you here is a part of. One brick at a time, we make a wall, and with that wall, we change the world. I'm thrilled today, at this point, to announce the preview of the 2021 Texan by Nature 20. We've heard from both industry and conservation groups today, and we will be celebrating the best in conservation this evening at our dinner. As we close out this summit, it's fitting that we celebrate industry leaders pushing the envelope for conservation and sustainability in Texas. The Texan by Nature 20 recognizes the best and the most innovative work in conservation coming from businesses based and operating in Texas. And we've heard from a myriad of all varieties of business. We honor companies across 12 industries in the Lone Star State whose ingenuity cultivates impactful programs and forges new and beneficial paths in conservation. With 170 million acres of land and global leadership across multiple industries, Texas is blessed to have industry leaders who see the value in partnering with conservation initiatives while also developing innovative, sustainable methods and processes within their businesses. To select the 2021 Texan by Nature 20, company data submissions were evaluated and independent research was done across more than 2,000 of Texas's publicly traded and private companies. It was conducted for 12 industry sectors. All companies were evaluated on key criteria through a 17-point scoring system to narrow down the list to the top 60 companies in Texas, and that was a hard job to do. We used key scoring criteria, including commitments to conservation, reported metrics related to conservation, measured investment in conservation, reported return on conservation, positive conservation impact on land, water, wildlife, people, waste, energy, and also activities such as infrastructure, production and supply chain, employee engagement, and more. Each year, an esteemed selection committee of top industry leaders is formed to evaluate the 60 companies and select the final honorees for the Texan by Nature 20. Thank you to this year's selection committee. You can see that these are leaders in their respective organizations and represent all industries honored by the Texan by Nature 20. Many of them are here with us today, and we deeply appreciate their commitment and expertise. Please join me in thanking this gifted and generous committee for the time given to understand and evaluate the goals, progress, and results of industry in conservation. I will now share with you the secret that you've all been sworn to keep to yourselves until tomorrow. This year's Texan by Nature 20. If you are an honoree, and we believe each of you are in spirit, and one day you'll be up here with us in person, please make your way to the stage and join me as I call out your name. Once we have the complete group, please stay on the stage for a photo. So without further delay, I'm delighted to announce the 2021 Texan by Nature 20. Alamo Group. Bank of America. Thank you. BNSF. Cemex. The City of San Antonio Office of Sustainability. Dell Technologies, Desert Door, Texas Sotal, Dallas Fort Worth International Airport. Farmer Brothers, HEB, HDR, Sanderson Farms, Shell Oil Company, thank you, thank you, Cisco, Texas Health Resources, Texas Instruments, the Beck Group Ltd., Vistra Corp., Walmart, Waste Management. Please join me in congratulating and thanking these leaders for their vision and work in conservation. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
So thank you very much. At this time, there will be a network reception out in the main area, and then dinner will start around 6 o'clock. So if you would, go ahead and make your way to the back. You guys please stay here. And if you do have another photo card, Jenny will be directing you, so come and line up around this stairway right here. All right, thank you guys very much.